For heaven's sake, Julia, you're not folding those napkins properly. The shrill voice of my mother-in-law, Marian, pierced through the kitchen like a hot knife through butter. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and counted to 10 before turning to face her. Marian, I've been folding napkins for dinner parties for 20 years. I think I know what I'm doing, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She huffed, her clipped silver hair bouncing as she shook her head. Well, clearly not. Here, let me show you the right way. Before I could protest, Marian had snatched the crisp linen napkin from my hands and began refolding it with exaggerated movements. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that she was still grieving. It had only been 3 months since her husband Frank had passed away, and Brian had insisted she move in with us temporarily. 3 months that felt like 3 years. Mom, leave Julia alone. She's got everything under control, Brian's voice came from the doorway. I shot him a grateful look, but Marian barely acknowledged him. I'm just trying to help, dear. After all, this dinner party is important for your promotion, isn't it? Marian said, her tone sickeningly sweet. Brian sighed. Yes, but... Then we want everything to be perfect, Marian interrupted, beaming at her son. Now, Julia, about the menu, are you sure you want to serve that salmon dish? It's so... common. I gritted my teeth. The salmon is Brian's boss's favorite, Marian. We've discussed this. If you say so, dear, she replied, patting my arm condescendingly. I just hope it's not too fishy. As Marian bustled out of the kitchen, I turned to Brian, my eyes pleading. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me. I'm sorry, honey, I know she can be a bit much, he murmured into my hair. I pulled away, looking up at him. A bit much? Brian, she's driving me crazy. How long is temporary going to last? Before he could answer, our daughter Ivy burst into the kitchen, her pigtails flying. Mommy, Grandma says I can wear my new party dress tonight. I frowned. Ivy, sweetie, we talked about this. That dress is for special occasions, not dinner at home. Ivy's face fell, but Grandma said, I don't care what Grandma said, I snapped, immediately regretting my harsh tone as Ivy's eyes welled up with tears. Brian knelt down beside her. Hey, Pumpkin, why don't you go put on that pretty blue dress we bought last week? You look like a princess in that one. Ivy nodded glumly and trudged out of the kitchen. I sank into a chair, feeling defeated. I'm sorry, Brian. I didn't mean to snap at her. He squeezed my shoulder. It's okay. We're all under a lot of stress right now. Just then, Marian's voice rang out from the living room. Julia, did you move my antique vase? I can't find it anywhere. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 again. I'd better go deal with that, I muttered, standing up. As I walked into the living room, I froze. Marian was standing there, holding the shattered remains of her precious vase. Her eyes were blazing with fury. What have you done? She hissed. I didn't touch it, Marian. I swear, I stammered, my heart racing. She advanced on me, pieces of porcelain crunching under her feet. Don't lie to me. You've always been jealous of my things. You probably did this on purpose. Mom, that's enough. Brian's voice boomed from behind me. Julia would never do something like that. Marian's face crumpled, and she burst into tears. Oh, Brian, your father gave me that vase on our 25th anniversary. It's all I have left of him. As Brian rushed to comfort his mother, I stood there, shell-shocked. How had a simple dinner party preparation turned into this nightmare? And how much longer could I endure living under the same roof as Marian? Little did I know this was just the beginning of a storm that would tear our family apart and push me to limits I never thought possible. The morning after the disastrous dinner party, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring at the pile of bills on the counter. My hands shook as I sorted through them, the numbers blurring before my eyes. How had things gotten so out of hand? Oh, Julia, you're up early. Marian's voice startled me. I quickly gathered the bills, trying to hide them from her prying eyes. Just getting a head start on the day, I replied, forcing a smile. Marian peered over my shoulder. Are those bills? My goodness, there are so many. Brian can't possibly be okay with all this spending. I felt my cheeks burn. Our finances are none of your concern, Marian. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. I'm just looking out for my son's best interests. You know, when I was managing our household. Mom, please, Brian interrupted, entering the kitchen. Julia's got it under control. Marian huffed, but retreated to the living room. Brian wrapped his arms around me from behind. Don't let her get to you, honey. We're doing fine. I leaned into him, wishing I could believe that. The truth was we were struggling. Between Ivy's school fees, the mortgage, and now the added expense of having Marion living with us, our savings were dwindling fast. Actually, Brian, I started, turning to face him, I think we need to talk about our budget with your mother here. Mommy. Ivy's excited voice cut through the tension. She bounded into the kitchen, waving a glossy catalog. Look what Grandma gave me. Can we order this dollhouse, please? I took the catalog, my eyes widening at the price tag. Sweetie, this is very expensive. We can't afford. Oh, don't be such a killjoy, Julia, Marion chimed in, following Ivy. Every little girl deserves a beautiful dollhouse. I'd be happy to contribute. I gritted my teeth. Marion, we've talked about this. You can't keep buying Ivy expensive gifts. Well, someone has to spoil her, Marion retorted. Lord knows you're too busy pinching pennies to give her any treats. That's enough, Brian's voice boomed, startling us all. Mom, I appreciate your generosity, but Julia and I make the decisions about Ivy's upbringing. And Julia, can we please discuss our finances in private? Ivy's lower lip trembled. So, no dollhouse? I knelt down, pulling her into a hug. Not right now, sweetheart, but how about we make one together? We can use that big cardboard box in the garage. Ivy's face lit up. Really? Can we start now? After breakfast, I promised, relief washing over me as she skipped away. Marion sniffed. Cardboard. How quaint. I ignored her, turning back to the bills. Brian, we really need to talk about this, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but can it wait until after work? I've got a big presentation today. Before I could respond, he kissed my cheek and hurried out the door. I stared after him, feeling more alone than ever. Throughout the day, Marion's criticisms continued to pile up. She questioned every purchase I made at the grocery store, scoffed at my attempts to mend Ivy's clothes instead of buying new ones, and even had the audacity to suggest I get a real job to contribute more to the household. By evening, I was at my breaking point. As I stirred a pot of soup, our third meal of leftovers this week, Marion hovered behind me. You know, Julia, she began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, I couldn't help but notice how worn out Brian looked this morning. Perhaps if you were more frugal with the household expenses, he wouldn't have to work so hard. The spoon clattered against the pot as I whirled to face her. That's it, Marion. I've had enough of your constant criticism and meddling. This is my home, my family, and I'm doing the best I can. Marion's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed dangerously. Well, I never. Is this how you repay my son's generosity? By disrespecting his mother? Mommy? Grandma? Ivy's small voice came from the doorway. Why are you yelling? As I looked from my daughter's confused face to Marion's smug one, I realized with a sinking heart that this battle was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, dreading another day of Marion's constant criticism. As I padded downstairs in my worn bathrobe, I heard her voice floating from the kitchen. Honestly, Brian, I don't know how you can stand it. Your wife lounging around in that ratty old thing. In my day, we made an effort to look presentable, even at home. I froze on the stairs, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Brian's response was too quiet to hear, but Marion's shrill laugh cut through the air like a knife. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and marched into the kitchen. Good morning, I said, forcing a smile. Marion's eyes raked over me, her lips pursed in disapproval. Oh, Julia, I was just telling Brian how a little effort goes a long way in keeping the spark alive in a marriage. I bit my tongue, pouring myself a cup of coffee. Brian cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, please. Julia works hard taking care of our home and Ivy. Of course, dear, Marion patted his hand. I'm sure she does her best. The backhanded compliment stung, but I refused to let her see how much she was getting to me. Instead, I focused on making Ivy's lunch for school. As I spread peanut butter on whole wheat bread, Marion peered over my shoulder. Oh, is that all you're giving her? When Brian was little, I always made sure he had a hot, nutritious lunch. A growing child needs proper fuel, you know? I slammed the knife down on the counter. Marion, I appreciate your concern, but I know what's best for my daughter. Well, excuse me for caring about my granddaughter's well-being, Marion sniffed. I suppose in this modern age, convenience trumps nutrition. Before I could retort, Ivy bounced into the kitchen. Morning, Mommy. Morning, Daddy. Morning, Grandma. Marion's face transformed into a mask of doting grandmother. Good morning, sweetheart. Are you ready for your big day? I frowned. Big day? Ivy's eyes widened. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Grandma's taking me shopping after school for a new outfit for picture day next week. My heart sank. Ivy, honey, we talked about this. We can't afford new clothes right now. You have plenty of nice things to wear for pictures. Marion waved her hand dismissively. Nonsense. Every little girl deserves to feel special on picture day. It's my treat. I felt my temper rising. Marion, we've discussed this. You can't keep undermining our parenting decisions. I'm not undermining anything, Marion replied, her voice sickly sweet. I'm simply being a loving grandmother, something you wouldn't understand, given your background. The room fell silent. Even Ivy sensed the tension, her small face creased with worry. What's that supposed to mean? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Marion's eyes glittered with malice. Well, dear, it's no secret that you didn't have the most stable upbringing. I'm just trying to give Ivy the advantages you never had. I felt like I'd been slapped. How dare she bring up my past? Before I could respond, Brian stepped between us. That's enough, Mom. You've crossed a line. Marion's face crumpled into a look of hurt innocence. I'm only trying to help. If you'd rather I not be involved in Ivy's life at all. No, Grandma, Ivy cried, throwing her arms around Marion's waist. I want you to take me shopping. I stood there, feeling utterly defeated. Brian shot me an apologetic look, but I turned away, unable to bear his pity. Fine, I said, my voice hollow. Take her shopping, but this discussion isn't over, Marion. As I walked out of the kitchen, I heard Marion's triumphant whisper to Ivy. Don't worry, darling. Grandma will make sure you have the prettiest dress in the whole school. I clenched my fists, a newfound determination rising within me. This woman had invaded my home, criticized my parenting, and was now trying to buy my daughter's affection. Something had to give, and soon. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. I stood in the doorway of Ivy's room, my jaw clenched as I surveyed the chaos before me. Scattered across the floor were piles of new clothes, shoes, and toys, all with price tags still attached. In the center of it all sat Ivy, happily playing with a brand-new tablet. Ivy, honey, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, where did all this come from? She looked up at me, her eyes shining. Grandma took me shopping again. Isn't it great, Mommy? My stomach churned. This was far beyond a simple picture day outfit. I picked up a designer dress, the price tag making me wince. Sweetie, this is too much. We can't keep all of this. Ivy's face fell. But Grandma said I deserved it. She said you and Daddy worked too hard to give me nice things. Before I could respond, Marion appeared behind me. Oh, Julia, don't be such a spoilsport. A grandmother is allowed to spoil her only grandchild, isn't she? I whirled to face her. Marion, this is completely out of hand. We can't afford. You can't afford it, Marion interrupted, her voice sickly sweet. I, on the other hand, have the means to give Ivy the life she deserves. The life she deserves? I repeated, my voice rising. What's that supposed to mean? Marion's eyes narrowed. Well, dear, let's be honest. Your humble upbringing hardly qualifies you to understand the finer things in life. I'm simply ensuring Ivy doesn't suffer the same limitations. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I glanced at Ivy, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. Ivy, sweetheart, can you go downstairs for a bit? Grandma and I need to talk. Once Ivy was out of earshot, I turned back to Marion. How dare you? You have no right to undermine our parenting or make decisions about what Ivy needs. Marion laughed, a cold, brittle sound. Oh, please, I've seen how you struggle to make ends meet. Face it, Julia, you're in over your head. Ivy deserves better than hand-me-downs and budget meals. We provide everything Ivy needs, I hissed. Love, stability, values. Things money can't buy. How quaint, Marion sneered. But in the real world, dear, money talks. And right now, I'm the one with the means to give Ivy a proper future. I felt something snap inside me. This ends now, Marion. I want you out of our house. Her eyes widened in mock surprise. Oh my, such hostility. I wonder what Brian would say if he knew how you were treating his poor widowed mother. As if on cue, I heard the front door open. I'm home, Brian called from downstairs. Marion's face twisted into a triumphant smirk. Well, why don't we ask him? She brushed past me, heading for the stairs. Panic rose in my throat as I followed her. I couldn't let her twist the situation to her advantage. In the living room, Brian was hugging Ivy. He looked up as we entered, his smile fading as he sensed the tension. "What's going on?" Marian's eyes welled with tears. "Oh, Brian, I'm afraid there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Julia seems to think I'm overstepping by buying a few things for Ivy." "A few things?" I sputtered. "Brian, you should see Ivy's room. It's like a department store exploded in there." Brian looked between us, confusion etched on his face. "Mom, we talked about this. You can't keep buying Ivy expensive gifts." "But, darling," Marian simpered, "I'm only trying to help. You work so hard, and Julia, well, she does her best, I suppose." I felt my face flush with anger. "That's it, Brian, I can't do this anymore. It's me or your mother. She has to go." The room fell silent. Brian's eyes widened in shock while Marian gasped dramatically. Ivy, sensing the tension, clung tighter to her father's leg. "Julia," Brian said slowly, "you can't be serious. She's my mother. Where would she go?" I stood my ground, my heart pounding. "I am serious, Brian. This is our family, our home, and I won't let her destroy it." As I looked at the faces around me, Brian's shock, Marian's smug defiance, and Ivy's confusion, I realized I had reached a point of no return. Whatever happened next would change our family forever, and I was ready for it. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching the small, handmade photo frame Ivy had given me for Mother's Day last year. It wasn't much, just popsicle sticks glued together and decorated with glitter and seashells, but it meant the world to me. Inside was a picture of Ivy and me, both laughing, our faces pressed close together. It was my anchor in the storm Marian had brought into our lives. "Julia?" Brian's voice called from downstairs. "Can you come down for a minute?" I sighed, placing the frame carefully on my nightstand before heading down. In the living room, Brian and Marian sat on opposite ends of the couch, both looking tense. "What's going on?" I asked, my guard immediately up. Brian cleared his throat. "Mom and I have been talking, and we think we've found a solution to make things easier for everyone." Marian nodded, her face a mask of concern. "We know things have been difficult, dear, so I've decided to move out." For a moment, relief washed over me. Then I saw the glint in Marian's eyes, and my stomach dropped. "That's good," I said cautiously. "Where will you go?" Brian shifted uncomfortably. "Well, that's the thing. Mom's found a nice little apartment nearby, but it's a bit more than she can afford on her own, so you're going to help her pay for it," I finished, my voice flat. Marian reached out, patting my hand. "Now, Julia, I know money's tight, but Brian assures me you can manage. After all, with me out of the house, you'll save on groceries and utilities." I pulled my hand away, fighting the urge to scream. "Brian, can I talk to you in private?" "In the kitchen." I rounded on him. "Are you serious? We can barely afford our own bills, and now you want to pay for your mother's apartment?" Brian ran a hand through his hair. "I know it's not ideal, but what choice do we have? We can't kick her out on the street." "She has money, Brian," I hissed. "All those expensive gifts for Ivy, she can afford her own place." "Mom says that was the last of her savings." Brian explained. "She was just trying to do something nice for Ivy before." I cut him off. "Before what? Before she guilted us into supporting her?" Brian's face hardened. "That's not fair, Julia. She's my mother. I can't abandon her." "And what about us?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What about our family?" Before Brian could answer, we heard a crash from the living room. We rushed back to find Marian on the floor, Ivy's photo frame shattered beside her. "Mom," Brian cried, helping her up. "Are you okay?" Marian whimpered, leaning heavily on him. "Oh, I'm so clumsy. I was just trying to look at that lovely picture of Ivy, and I must have lost my balance." I knelt, carefully picking up the pieces of the frame. My heart sank as I realized it was beyond repair. "I'm so sorry, dear," Marian simpered. "I know how much that meant to you, but really, it was just a childish craft. Perhaps now you can get a proper frame for that beautiful photo." I looked up, meeting Marian's eyes. In that moment I saw the truth, the calculated malice behind her innocent act. She hadn't fallen. She'd destroyed my precious gift on purpose. "Julia?" Brian's voice was concerned. "Are you all right?" I stood slowly, the broken pieces of the frame clutched in my hands. "No," I said quietly. I turned to Brian, my decision made. "I want her gone, Brian. Not to an apartment we pay for. Gone. Or I swear, I'll take Ivy and leave myself." The room fell silent. Brian looked shocked, Marian's face a mix of triumph and fear. and in the doorway stood Ivy, her eyes wide and brimming with tears. I knew I'd just lit the fuse on a powder keg, but I couldn't back down now. Something had to give, and I was determined it wouldn't be me or my family. Whatever came next, I was ready to fight. The tension in the house was unbearable. Brian had retreated to his study while Marion locked herself in her room, playing the victim. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I tried to piece together Ivy's broken photo frame. "Mommy?" Ivy's small voice startled me. She stood in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "Are you and Daddy fighting because of me?" My heart broke. "No, sweetheart, come here." I pulled her onto my lap, holding her close. "This isn't your fault. Grown-ups sometimes have disagreements, but we'll work it out." Ivy's eyes fell on the broken frame. "Is that the present I made you?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, but don't worry, I'll fix it." Her little face scrunched up in confusion. "But I saw Grandma break it." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, honey?" Ivy fidgeted, looking down. "I saw Grandma pick it up and throw it on the floor." She looked angry. Then she called for Daddy and pretended to fall. I felt a rush of emotions, anger, vindication, and a fierce protectiveness for my daughter. "Ivy, this is very important. Are you absolutely sure that's what you saw?" She nodded solemnly. "I'm sure, Mommy. Grandma lied." Just then, Brian walked into the kitchen. "What's going on?" I stood up, setting Ivy down gently. "Brian, Ivy has something to tell you." As Ivy recounted what she'd seen, Brian's face went through a range of emotions: disbelief, shock, and finally, anger. "That can't be true," he muttered. "Mom wouldn't." "I'm not lying, Daddy," Ivy insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. Brian knelt down, hugging her. "I believe you, sweetheart. Why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Mommy and I need to talk." After Ivy left, Brian turned to me, his face pale. "Julia, I don't know what to say." Before I could respond, Marion's voice rang out from the doorway. "Well, I certainly have something to say. How dare you turn my own granddaughter against me?" I whirled to face her. "We didn't turn anyone against you, Marion. Ivy saw what you did." Marion's face contorted with rage. "You little liar! Brian, surely you don't believe this nonsense?" Brian stood, his voice quiet but firm. "Mom, Ivy has no reason to lie. But you've been manipulating us from the start, haven't you?" Marion's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. "I see. So this is how it's going to be? You'll choose your wife's delusions over your own mother?" "They're not delusions, Mom," Brian said. "I've been blind to it, but Julia was right all along. You've been trying to drive a wedge between us since you moved in." Marion laughed bitterly. "Oh, please. I've only ever wanted what's best for this family. If Julia can't handle a little constructive criticism, that's hardly my fault." "Constructive criticism?" I exploded. "You've undermined me at every turn, spoiled Ivy rotten, and now you've destroyed something precious to me out of spite." "You can't prove anything," Marion hissed. "Actually, we can," Brian interjected. "I installed security cameras last month after that string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I never thought I'd need to check them for something like this, but—" Marion's face drained of color. You spied on me?" Brian shook his head, looking pained. "No, Mom. We trusted you, but now I think it's time we saw the truth." As Brian left to retrieve the footage, Marion turned to me, her eyes blazing with hatred. "This isn't over, Julia. You may have won this battle, but I promise you'll regret the day you ever crossed me." I stood my ground, meeting her gaze. "No, Marion, you're the one who's going to regret ever trying to destroy my family." The sound of Brian's footsteps returning made us both turn. He stood in the doorway, laptop in hand, his face a mask of shock and disappointment. "I've seen enough," he said quietly. "Mom, I think it's time you left. For good." As Marion's face crumpled in defeat, I felt a mix of triumph and sadness. We'd won, but at what cost? The family was fractured, trust was broken, and the road to healing seemed impossibly long. But as I looked at Brian, seeing the determination in his eyes, I knew we'd face whatever came next together. The storm wasn't over, but for the first time in months, I could see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The silence in the house was deafening. Brian sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, while I paced the floor, my mind racing. Marion had locked herself in her room after Brian's ultimatum, and we could hear her muffled sobs through the walls. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Brian looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I don't know, Julia. I never thought. She's my mother. How could she do this to us? Before I could respond, we heard a crash from upstairs, followed by Ivy's scream. We bolted up the stairs, our hearts pounding. Ivy stood in the hallway, tears streaming down her face, pointing at Marion's room. "Grandma's throwing things," she cried. Brian tried the door, but it was locked. "Mom," he shouted, pounding on the wood. "Open the door." Another crash, followed by the sound of breaking glass. I pulled Ivy close, shielding her. "Brian, we need to get in there. She might hurt herself." He nodded, then stepped back and kicked the door. It splintered open, revealing a scene of chaos. Marion stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by broken knickknacks and torn photos. In her hand, she clutched a small object I couldn't quite make out. "Mom," Brian said softly, approaching her like she was a wounded animal. "Put it down. Let's talk about this." Marion's eyes were wild, darting between us. "Talk? There's nothing to talk about. You've made your choice. You've chosen her over your own mother." I stepped forward, still holding Ivy. "Marion, please. This isn't about choosing sides. We just want what's best for everyone." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "What's best? You want to throw me out on the street after everything I've done for this family." "Everything you've done, I couldn't hold back anymore. You've done nothing but criticize and undermine me since the day you moved in. You've tried to turn my own daughter against me." Marion's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little." She raised her hand, and I finally saw what she was holding. A small, ornate letter opener that had belonged to her late husband. Brian lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. "Mom, stop! This isn't you!" As they struggled, I pushed Ivy behind me, my heart racing. Suddenly, Marion wrenched free, the letter opener slicing through the air. I felt a sharp sting on my cheek, and warm blood trickled down my face. The room fell silent. Marion stared at the blood on the letter opener, her face a mask of shock. Brian looked between us, horror etched on his features, and behind me, Ivy began to sob. "Oh, God," Marion whispered, the letter opener clattering to the floor. "What have I done?" Brian moved quickly, grabbing a towel and pressing it to my cheek. "Julia, are you okay? We need to get you to a hospital." I nodded, still in shock. As Brian guided me out of the room, I heard Marion's broken voice behind us. "Brian, I'm sorry, I didn't mean." He turned, his voice cold. "Save it, Mom. We're done here. When we get back, I want you gone. Do you understand?" Gone. As we made our way downstairs, Ivy clinging to my side, I felt a mix of emotions washing over me. Relief that the confrontation was over, fear for what the future held, and a deep, aching sadness for the family that had been torn apart. In the car on the way to the hospital, Brian reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry, Julia, for everything. I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you and Ivy." I squeezed back, wincing at the pain in my cheek. "We'll get through this, Brian. Together." As we drove into the night, I knew that while one chapter of our lives was ending, another was just beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt hope blooming in my chest. Whatever came next, we would face it as a family, stronger and more united than ever before. 6 months had passed since that fateful night. The small scar on my cheek had faded, but the emotional wounds were still healing. As I stood in our freshly painted living room, I couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. The doorbell rang, startling me from my reverie. Brian appeared from the kitchen, squeezing my hand reassuringly before opening the door. There stood Marion, a shadow of her former self. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair. Instead, she wore a simple blouse and slacks, her gray hair pulled back in a modest bun. "Come in, Mom," Brian said, his voice neutral. Marion stepped inside, her eyes darting nervously around the room before settling on me. "Julia," she said softly, "thank you for agreeing to see me." I nodded, my throat tight. This was the moment we'd been building towards for months, the final confrontation, the chance for closure. We settled in the living room, an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air. Finally, Marion spoke. I don't know where to begin. What I did was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," I replied, my voice steady. "You nearly destroyed our family, Marion." She flinched at my words, but nodded. "I know, and I've spent every day since then trying to understand why I did it. The therapist I've been seeing, she's helped me see how my own insecurities and fears drove me to lash out at you." Brian leaned forward. "That's no excuse, Mom. You hurt Julia. You manipulated Ivy. You—" "I know," Marion interrupted, tears welling in her eyes. I know, and I'm so sorry. I've been working hard these past months. I got a job at the local library. I've been volunteering at the senior center. I'm trying to be a better person, to make amends. I studied her face, searching for any sign of the manipulative woman who had tormented me for so long. Instead, I saw genuine remorse and a deep, aching sadness. Marion, I said slowly, I appreciate your apology. But you have to understand, trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It will take time, a lot of time, before we can even think about having you back in our lives in any significant way. She nodded, wiping away a tear. I understand. I don't expect forgiveness, Julia. I needed you both to know how sorry I am, and that I'm committed to changing. Just then, we heard the patter of small feet. Ivy appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight of her grandmother. Grandma? She said hesitantly. Marion's face softened. Hello, sweetheart. You've grown so much. Ivy looked at me, uncertainty in her eyes. I nodded, giving her permission to approach. She walked over to Marion, studying her carefully. You look different, she said. Marion smiled sadly. I am different, Ivy. I've learned a lot about being kind and respectful. I'm sorry for the way I behaved before. To my surprise, Ivy reached out and patted Marion's hand. It's okay, Grandma. Mommy says everyone makes mistakes sometimes. The important thing is to learn from them. I felt a lump form in my throat at my daughter's wisdom. Brian caught my eye, a mix of pride and love in his gaze. As Marion prepared to leave, she turned to us one last time. I know I have no right to ask this, but is there any chance someday that we might be able to start over? Brian and I exchanged a look. After a moment, I spoke. We can't make any promises, Marion. But if you continue on this path, if you truly commit to change, maybe, someday, we can try to build a new relationship, a healthier one. Marion nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. As we watched her drive away, Brian wrapped his arm around me. You okay? He asked softly. I leaned into him, feeling the strength of our bond. I am. For the first time in a long time, I really am. Ivy tugged at my hand. Can we have ice cream now? Brian and I laughed, the tension finally breaking. As we headed to the kitchen, I realized that this wasn't just an ending, it was a new beginning. We had weathered the storm, emerged stronger, and now, finally, we could start to rebuild. Not just our family, but ourselves. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. Living well, on our own terms, free from the shadows of the past.
I was really looking forward to when you would bring up divorce, you know. Seriously, being poor without parents is just no good. With a mocking smile, Dorothy said this in a sharp voice. I had been tormented by Dorothy, my mother-in-law, since the beginning of my marriage. She would barge into the house where my husband and I lived without asking. Wait for me to come home from work, and endlessly complain while watching me do housework. The way I cleaned, how I folded the laundry, the seasoning of the food. She would meddle in everything, but Dorothy never offered to help. One day, after enduring so much, I finally reached my limit. You were raised in a fatherless home. So you never really learned how to cook properly, did you? Your taste buds are so messed up, your food isn't even good. Dorothy, who had been sampling the food without permission, hurled such abuse. I had been raised by my grandfather since I was a child, as my parents were not around. I couldn't forgive her for mocking my grandfather, knowing this. In a fit of anger, I brought up divorce, and both Dorothy and Howard readily agreed. Dorothy, spewing things with a tone of satisfaction, was joined by Howard saying, "That's right. The difference in family status was just too great. Next time, we'll find someone with a family as good as ours." But the two of them didn't know. The time when they could laugh was only temporary. In the not-too-distant future, they would learn the truth and collapse in despair. My name is Lucy Thompson, a 33-year-old part-time housewife. 2 years ago, I married Howard, a senior colleague at work. He had been teaching me various things since I joined the company. If you don't understand something, feel free to ask me anything, he said with a kind smile, completely capturing my heart. I, who had little experience in love, couldn't actively approach him. Asking work-related questions was all I could manage. Even thinking about asking personal questions or inviting him out for a meal after work made my face hot. However, Howard eventually asked me out. I was attracted to your hardworking and sincere demeanor. Would you like to date me? I nodded without hesitation to his words. After dating for several years, we got married and started living together. In my heart, there was the joy of being able to be with the person I loved forever, as well as the relief of finally being able to reassure my grandfather. I had lost my parents when I was young, and my grandfather, Frank Irving, had taken me in and raised me. Why don't I have parents? During my rebellious phase, I would scream in a shrill voice at my grandfather, although I knew it wasn't his fault. Now that I'm an adult, such things are behind me, and we have a good relationship. The sad look on my grandfather's face at that time still haunts me. I felt guilty for causing him trouble and wanted to repay him somehow. I decided to be as filial as possible. I gave him presents with my first salary, took him on trips for his birthday, and brought him to nice restaurants. By marrying Howard and building a family, I thought I had finally truly reassured him. Lucy, be happy. At the wedding, my grandfather said this through tears, and I cried too. Initially, Howard and I were busy with work, but we had recently settled down and started thinking about having children. Of course, I wanted children, but the pressure from my mother-in-law, Dorothy, was also a factor that made me think seriously about it. Lucy, you've been married for 2 years now, haven't you? Don't you want to give me a grandchild soon? I couldn't count how many times she had said something like that. Yes, eventually. I would vaguely smile and divert the topic. But being confronted every time we met was quite stressful. Even when I looked to Howard for help, whether he noticed or pretended not to see, he said nothing. Tired of enduring the pressure to have grandchildren, I reduced my visits to my in-laws' home. But it was in vain. Dorothy started barging into the house where Howard and I lived. "Huh, Mother. Why are you here?" When I first witnessed this, I exclaimed in surprise, but Dorothy remained calm and said, "Howard gave me a spare key. We're family, so there's no problem coming in, right?" What initially happened only on weekends now occurred even on weekdays, mercilessly. About 3 to 4 days a week, I was greeted by Dorothy in the living room as I came home. I had gotten used to it, or rather, since she wouldn't stop no matter how many times I said it, I was resigned to saying, "I'm home," as a habit. And if you wondered whether Dorothy did any housework before we returned, the answer is no. On the contrary, she would say, "Hurry up and prepare dinner. I've been waiting and am starving," while I was still putting away my things and starting to cook. Outwardly, I would obediently respond, but inside, I deeply sighed. I had argued back before, but that would only lead to a long lecture. Well, even if I didn't say anything back, Dorothy would still give unsolicited advice, or rather lectures, about housework. When I returned home late due to overtime and tried to heat up some leftovers, Dorothy would say, "Leftovers? Are you cutting corners? Food should be freshly cooked. Surely you're not letting Howard eat such terrible meals." Dorothy would criticize without lifting a finger to help, so I was utterly fed up with her. Even if I showed a hint of dissatisfaction, she would scream, "What, do you have a problem with what I'm saying? I'm giving you advice as someone with more life experience." As these incidents continued, I grew more adept at ignoring Dorothy's nagging. But there was something I couldn't forgive. while waiting for us to return. Dorothy would use the water and electricity without any consideration. Once, she left the TV on while taking a nap during the day. Thanks to, or rather because of, her actions, our utility bills were skyrocketing. Tired of her behavior, I consulted Howard several times, asking him to talk to his mother and request the return of the spare key, but he wouldn't listen. "Oh, don't say things like that," he would chide me with a smile. From his perspective, Dorothy's actions were her way of trying to get along with me. "Don't be so tense, I want us to get along," Howard would say, apparently out of goodwill, so I couldn't speak up strongly. But Dorothy's remarks kept escalating for the worse. "Really, Lucy, you're so clumsy. Maybe it's because you're from a single-parent family that things don't work out?" She would start saying things that belittled my grandfather, my guardian. And I had reached my limit. Apparently, Dorothy thought raising children as a couple was superior to being a single parent. Then, one day, I received a surprising message. "Today, your mother-in-law visited unexpectedly." The person who contacted me was a woman named Olivia, the secretary at my grandfather's company. I couldn't see her face over the phone, but I could easily tell from her tone of voice that she was making a bitter expression. What? Why would she do that? Could it be that she went to tell my grandfather the same kind of insults she usually says to me? I imagined Dorothy, with a sneering smile, spewing out words like, "Lucy is really incompetent, isn't she? You were like a parent to her, right? What kind of education did you give her?" However, contrary to my expectation, it seems she only came because the president had once said, "Please visit whenever you are nearby." She just came, ate her fill of tea snacks, and left. Apparently, Dorothy took my grandfather's polite invitation literally. "I had delicious sweets at your grandfather's company. It's so kind of him to say. Feel free to visit if you're nearby," Dorothy, who was usually waiting at our house, happily reported this to me as soon as I opened the front door. Although it's possible that my grandfather said that, can't Dorothy read between the lines? Even if she really did want to visit, isn't it common sense to contact him beforehand? I could only let out a dry laugh, dumbfounded. My response must have displeased her, as Dorothy's expression suddenly changed, furrowing her brow. And as usual, she began to make sarcastic remarks to me. "By the way, when are you going to manage to come home earlier? If you were more capable, you should be able to finish quickly and come home, right?" My lips twitched. I was used to hearing insults from Dorothy, but that didn't mean they didn't hurt. I tried not to take them too seriously, but I hadn't reached the point where I could just smile and ignore them. "If you don't come home early, Howard will always have to eat the unappetizing leftovers, won't he? Really, you lack the spirit to support your husband." "I'm sorry, I've been busy with work." How I wished I could say, "Then why don't you cook, Mother?" Instead, as I spoke, hiding my true feelings, Dorothy's eyes narrowed sharply. "Don't make excuses. The poor have no leisure" fits this situation perfectly. You're in this mess because you were raised by a single parent and don't have money. I couldn't hide my bewilderment at her words. I opened my mouth to retort, but all that came out were meaningless words like, "Well, you're just like that guardian grandfather of yours, aren't you? He was kind, sure, but his company is old and small. He probably hasn't achieved much in terms of performance. Your grandfather's clothes were always so shabby too. I wonder if he even has money to buy clothes." Being criticized alongside my grandfather was just too hard to take. Unable to endure it any longer, I raised my voice. Please stop speaking ill of my grandfather. What do you know about him, Mother? This seemed to irritate Dorothy, as her face clearly showed her anger. Oh. A daughter-in-law talking back to her mother-in-law, how rude. Apologize right now, say I'm sorry for being impudent. I stood my ground and glared back at Dorothy. It was absolutely wrong for me to apologize after she insulted my dear grandfather. The one lacking common sense wasn't me, but Dorothy. What's with that look? It really irritates me. Dorothy yelled at me. She is shorter than me. But she seemed much bigger due to her intimidating presence. You're just upset because I hit the nail on the head, aren't you? Don't you feel ashamed that your grandfather still has to work hard at his age? That's not true at all. I am proud of my grandfather. But even when I expressed this, Dorothy just snorted dismissively and did not apologize to my grandfather. Oh, maybe it's not your grandfather who should feel ashamed, but you? Isn't it embarrassing that he has to work at his age because you're so poor? Worn out by Dorothy's baseless accusations, I lost the energy to argue back. I let out a loud sigh so she could hear and said, "Enough," before returning to my room. From that day on, Dorothy's treatment of me grew even harsher. And her frequency of invading our home also increased. Look, this isn't done right. Do it over immediately. Whenever my way of doing household chores displeased her, she would immediately scream at me. It started with complaints about dust left in the corners of the room or sloppy folding of laundry. And she even demanded I change the arrangement of the furniture because she didn't like it. Whenever I opened my mouth to say something, she would cut me off with a loud lecture. As this continued, I realized that if I didn't say anything, the lecture would end in about 15 minutes. It was a sad lesson to learn. As a result, whenever I heard Dorothy's angry voice, I would clench my jaw and endure silently. The lectures always happened when Howard was not around. Your mother came to the house again on her own. She even gave a lecture, "What should I do?" Although I told him this, he would never take my side against his mother. If I just endured, everything would end without incident. I understood this logically, but I couldn't accept it emotionally. And I found myself crying in secret in the bathroom late at night. Finally, my stress reached its limit, and the day came when my patience snapped. I lost count. It might have been the 100th or even more dinner with Dorothy and Howard. Of course, I hadn't invited Dorothy, she just imposed herself in our home. As I was setting the dinner table, Dorothy reached out and snatched food from a plate before we even said, "Let's eat." I frowned, but thinking that if Dorothy noticed my changed expression, a tedious lecture would start. I quickly shook my head to dismiss it. After chewing a few times, Dorothy swallowed and burst out. "What is this food? It's really awful. Make it again. You were raised in a fatherless home and weren't taught to cook properly by a man. Your taste is so messed up, the food isn't tasty at all." With a crude laugh, she spewed her insults. The moment I heard that, something snapped inside my head. So this is what it means for one's patience to snap, I realized firsthand. Indeed, my grandfather raised me. So what? Gender doesn't matter. My grandfather raised me with love. Please stop mocking my important family, I shouted, and even after that, my anger didn't subside. And I was panting as if I had been exercising for a while. Dorothy and Howard looked surprised at first, but their expressions quickly changed to mocking smiles. Seeing that, I was shocked that none of my feelings had gotten through to them. "Let's get a divorce," I can't stay with people who endlessly mock others like you do. Ah, I understand. When I proposed divorce, they agreed surprisingly easily. In fact, they seemed pleased, as if they had been waiting for me to say it. I was really looking forward to when you would bring up divorce. Seriously, being poor without parents is just no good. I was worried about your poverty rubbing off on us, so it's great you brought it up. That's right. The difference in family status was just too great. Next time, we'll find someone with a family as good as ours. Dorothy was as usual. But Howard seemed like a completely different person than before we married. Where had the kind man who had gently guided me when I didn't understand something gone? No, perhaps this was his true nature. Well, now that it's settled, hurry up and leave, you broke loser. While enduring endless insults, I packed my things and asked my grandfather to pick me up. I bit my lower lip hard and made sure not to talk back anymore. Nothing would resonate with those two heartless people. Upon receiving a message from my grandfather that he had arrived, I left without saying thank you or goodbye. I just put on my shoes and opened the front door. There stood my grandfather, looking worried. Spotting him, Dorothy deepened her grin and jeered. "Oh dear, isn't it nice of your grandfather to come pick you up? You must be starting early again tomorrow for work, right? Poor people just don't get a break, huh?" Olivia, the secretary who had come with my grandfather, had a vein pop on her forehead upon hearing this. Without anyone noticing, she had prepared the divorce papers and pulled them out of her bag to present to Howard. "You had it prepared already? How kind of you." "That's right. It saves us the trouble, doesn't it?" While laughing with Dorothy, Howard immediately signed the divorce papers. The expressions on my face, my grandfather's, and Olivia's were completely different from theirs. We were all dead serious, emotion wiped from our faces. "I'll file the divorce papers myself." "Sure, take care of it, will you?" "Then hurry up and go. I'm happy that our child won't have any poverty in their bloodline." It seemed she couldn't be satisfied without a final jab. Even though I glared at her with all my might, Dorothy was unfazed. "Well, I'll go ahead with the president to bring the car around." Saying that, my grandfather and Olivia left. Then, for some reason, Howard and Dorothy also came down to the entrance of the apartment building. "I just thought we should properly say goodbye since you took care of us." Dorothy said this, but her true intention to mock us was transparent. I kept quiet since it was useless to say anything. But I couldn't stand them making a mockery of my grandfather. I was about to turn around and unleash a torrent of complaints, but Olivia stopped me. She was, for some reason, beaming with a wide smile. "I'm going to get the car, so hold back for now." She told me that and then went to the parking lot. Misunderstanding my inability to endure being laughed at as fleeing, Dorothy and Howard continued to laugh joyously. Then a luxury car arrived, and my grandfather got out. Seeing this, their eyes widened and they approached as if drawn by a magnet. "Wow, that car is pretty expensive, isn't it? No way that poor man bought it himself. He must have rented it to show off." It seemed they wouldn't be satisfied until they had ridiculed us completely. I got into the car and exchanged a knowing grin with my grandfather. Seeing us, Olivia crossed her arms and murmured meaningfully, "The real show starts now." The next day, while I was visiting my grandfather's company for some errands, I noticed the lobby becoming noisy. I was standing a bit away, but since the lobby echoed well, I could hear the noise. "Bring out the president now. We know he's here." Hearing these shouts, I placed a hand on my forehead. Peeking from behind a column, I saw Dorothy and Howard causing a scene. Security guards were restraining them as they flailed and yelled, "Let go!" The other employees watched from a safe distance, careful not to get involved. What were they doing here? Perhaps they were so upset about the luxury car the day before that they came to check if my grandfather really owned it. Bored, perhaps? While feeling dismayed, I approached them and asked, "What are you doing here?" My voice, devoid of any warmth or emotion, sounded detached. They turned to me and yelled, "Call the president." "It's your grandfather we're talking about." I couldn't help but laugh at my misinformed in-laws, which annoyed them, causing their eyebrows to twitch. My grandfather isn't here. His actual workplace is the building next door. Next door? What do you mean? In fact, the place we were in was rarely used by anyone. The president's office was located in a rare high-rise building next door. Both this building and the one next door are owned by my company. My grandfather spoke with a voice as if crawling from the depths of hell, revealing himself in the lobby. My usually calm grandfather wore an expression I had seldom seen before, his eyebrows and eyes lifted in a demonic glare. As my grandfather approached them with large strides and looked down at them sternly, Dorothy and Howard could only open and close their mouths like fish begging for food, despite their previous arrogance in belittling others. My grandfather, still unbent and tall, loomed over them with considerable presence. Dorothy and Howard were completely overwhelmed, and all they could manage was to let out a weak, hoarse noise as they exhaled. I never expected to be looked down upon just based on the appearance of the company I work for. What kind of thought process is that? No, I mean, we weren't looking down on you or anything. Dorothy desperately tried to make excuses, but her far-fetched explanations almost made me burst out laughing. If that wasn't condescending, I'd love to know what is. The scenes of Dorothy and Howard hurling abuse at me and my grandfather were clearly etched in our minds. From the beginning, when you visited the company unannounced, I felt something was off. It's ironic to be told I lack common sense by someone without any. As my grandfather confronted Dorothy, Howard began to inch backwards. But the security guards behind him didn't miss a beat, blocking his escape and glaring at him. My grandfather sighed once before continuing. Originally, I lived a bit farther away. But when I could no longer endure my stress due to their taunting, I made preparations to set up a new company nearby to have a small measure of revenge. That's impossible. Dorothy finally managed to speak up, her voice loud. Her lips were pale and trembling, not unlike someone who just got out of a cold pool. Just a few months ago, your company was old and falling apart. There's no way you could prepare a new office in such a short time. You must be embarrassed by being ridiculed by us, so please don't exaggerate. To that, my grandfather replied calmly. That rundown company you're talking about was the first workplace. My real grandfather started from scratch when he founded his business. I kept it because it had sentimental value. The emphasis on rundown was quite strong. Although my grandfather didn't think so himself, irritation and sadness from being belittled by Dorothy were probably infused in his tone. Huh, your real grandfather? What do you mean? I don't understand. Dorothy collapsed weakly onto the floor, literally clutching her head in confusion, and mumbled to herself while looking back and forth between me and my grandfather. Pretending not to notice her gaze, I suggested to my grandfather. It seems she still can't believe it. Why don't you show her the building next door? My grandfather chuckled and agreed, indeed. Then pointed towards the entrance of the building. Would you like a tour if it's okay with you? His face, previously angry, had changed back to the gentle smile he usually showed me. The intimidation gone, Dorothy and Howard visibly relaxed, their faces shifting from frightened to smirking. However, cold sweat was still evident on their foreheads, showing that they were not completely at ease. Ah, yes, well, why don't you show us around? It seems they can't be satisfied without looking down on me or my grandfather. It's just the exterior that's nice, the inside must be as rundown as this place, Howard whispered to Dorothy, laughing, apparently still not realizing that my grandfather was displeased with being called rundown. Whether he was unaware of his own volume or not, we could hear everything clearly. However, Dorothy and Howard, who had been displaying such confidence, lost their words as they entered the new company. The corridor bustling with many employees. The sophisticated design of the interior, they were so stunned that their jaws might as well have dropped. What is this? To think that he's running such a large company. Don't joke with us, are you mocking us? After standing rigid for a while, they seemed to snap back to reality, scratching their heads and beginning to go mad. Who was it that ridiculed us first? As they declared this, they stopped in their tracks and collapsed together, then were dragged out by the security guards. After that, we received no further contact from them. Rumor has it that after ridiculing my well-known grandfather in the industry, Howard was being given cold stares at his company. He was feeling so sidelined that he was thinking of resigning from his job. He had mentioned marrying someone of similar social status after our breakup. But now it seems like that's not possible for him. My grandfather has further expanded the company and handed over the presidency to me. And now he is enjoying his retirement. Determined not to be outdone by his greatness, I vowed to work even harder.
I never thought my world would shatter on a regular Tuesday afternoon. But that's the thing about life-changing moments, they don't wait for special occasions. My name is Avery, and I was 17 when my mother decided to rewrite our entire lives without bothering to use a pencil first. I remember walking up our cracked driveway after school, my backpack heavy with AP Calculus homework, when I noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked in my dad's old spot. Nobody had parked there since he passed away last year. Mom had been pretty clear about keeping that space empty, like some sort of memorial. The front door was unlocked, which was weird because Mom usually worked late at the hospital. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard laughter coming from our kitchen, not just Mom's, but other voices too. Male. Female. Strangers. Avery. Perfect timing. Mom called out. She appeared in the hallway, practically glowing. I hadn't seen her smile like that since before Dad got sick. Come meet everyone. Everyone? Since when did we have an everyone? I followed her into the kitchen, where a tall man in an expensive-looking suit was leaning against our counter like he owned it. Next to him stood a girl maybe 3 years younger than me, wearing the kind of clothes I could only window shop at the mall. Honey, this is Ethan, Mom said, practically bouncing on her toes. And his daughter, Chloe. Ethan stepped forward, hand extended. It's wonderful to finally meet you, Avery. Your mother has told me so much about you. Finally? How long had this been going on? And there's something else we want to tell you, Mom continued, grabbing Ethan's arm. That's when I noticed it, the diamond ring catching the afternoon light. My stomach dropped. We're getting married. Mom announced. And Ethan and Chloe are moving in this weekend. Isn't it wonderful? The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. Chloe was examining her nails, looking about as thrilled as I felt. Ethan's smile seemed practiced, like something from a toothpaste commercial. Moving in? I repeated. This weekend? I know it seems sudden, Mom said, her smile faltering slightly. But when you just know. Right, honey. She looked at Ethan adoringly. Absolutely, he agreed, kissing her cheek. And Avery, I want you to know that I'm not trying to replace your father. I just want to make your mother happy and hopefully become a friend to you. Friend? My father's body wasn't even cold in his grave, and this stranger was standing in our kitchen, wearing my dad's smile. Planning to sleep in my dad's bed. Where's Chloe staying? I asked, already knowing the answer. We thought you girls could share your room. Mom said brightly. It'll be like having a sister. Chloe's head snapped up. Wait, what? Dad, you said I'd get my own room. Princess, we talked about this, Ethan said smoothly. It's just temporary until we figure out the sleeping arrangements. My room. The only place I had left that was still mine, still connected to who I used to be when Dad was alive. And now I was supposed to share it with a stranger? I have homework, I mumbled, turning to leave. Avery, wait, Mom called after me. Don't you want to stay and chat? Get to know your new family? New family. The words hit me like a physical blow. I already had a family, I said quietly, not turning around. And Dad's only been gone 14 months. I heard Mom's sharp intake of breath, followed by Ethan's murmured consolations. As I climbed the stairs to my room, our room now, I guess, I could hear them all down there, planning their perfect new life together. I sat on my bed, staring at the photo of Dad and me from my 16th birthday. He was smiling, really smiling, not that fake toothpaste commercial smile Ethan had perfected. My phone buzzed. A text from Grandpa Walter, how was school today, kiddo? I looked at the message for a long moment, then started typing, Grandpa, can I come over? I need to talk to you about Mom. Grandpa Walter's house always smelled like old books and coffee. It was the one place that still felt like home since Dad died, and as I sat in his worn leather armchair, clutching a mug of hot chocolate, I could almost pretend everything was normal. She didn't even ask me, Grandpa, I said, watching him settle into his usual spot by the window. One minute I'm thinking about calculus, the next I've got a whole new family. He adjusted his reading glasses, his eyes kind but concerned. Your mother's always been impulsive when she's hurting. Remember the time she bought that ridiculous sports car after your grandmother passed? At least the car didn't try to take over my bedroom, I muttered. A week had passed since Ethan and Chloe moved in, and everything felt wrong. The house was filled with unfamiliar sounds, Chloe's loud phone conversations, Ethan's business calls. The constant rearranging of furniture to accommodate their belongings. How's the room-sharing situation working out? Grandpa asked. I pulled out my phone and showed him a picture. She's taken over 3/4 of the closet, covered every surface with her makeup, and plays these weird ASMR videos to fall asleep. ASMR? Trust me, you don't want to know. The front door chimed, and Mom walked in without knocking. She never did anymore, even though this was her father's house. I thought I'd find you here, she said, her smile tight. Honey, we're having a family dinner tonight. Ethan's bringing his parents over. I have a calc test tomorrow, I said, not meeting her eyes. Avery, please. This is important to me. She turned to Grandpa. Dad, you should come too. It would mean a lot to have everyone there. Before Grandpa could respond, voices drifted in from outside. Through the window, I saw Ethan and Chloe walking up the path to the house. They weren't supposed to be here. I just wanted to see the property, Ethan was saying as they entered. Walter, your house is beautiful. Such potential. Potential? Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. Thank you, Grandpa said carefully. It served me well these past 30 years. Have you ever thought about selling? Ethan asked, his eyes scanning the room like he was taking inventory. The market in this area is incredible right now. Mom shot him a warning look. Ethan, we talked about this. About what? I asked, looking between them. Nothing, sweetheart, Mom said quickly. Ethan's just interested in real estate. But I saw the way Ethan's hand rested possessively on Mom's waist, the way she wouldn't meet Grandpa's eyes. Something was happening here that nobody wanted to tell me. Actually, Ethan continued, ignoring Mom's attempt to change the subject, I know a developer who'd be very interested in this location. The lot size alone. This house isn't for sale, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Of course not, Mom said soothingly. Nobody's selling anything. Now, about dinner tonight. I think I heard you wrong earlier, Grandpa said, his voice unusually stern. It sounded like you were suggesting I sell my home. The room grew tense. Chloe, who had been texting in the corner, finally looked up, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Dad, Mom said, we should discuss this later. Discuss what? I demanded. What's going on? Ethan cleared his throat. We're just exploring options. With the wedding coming up, we thought it might be nice to pool our resources. Maybe find a bigger place where we could all live together. All live together? I echoed. The hot chocolate in my stomach turned sour. It was just an idea, Mom said quickly. Nothing's decided. But I saw it now, the way Ethan looked at the house, at Grandpa, at me. We were all just pieces on his chessboard, waiting to be moved around. I should go study, I said, standing up. For that calc test you don't want me to take. As I left, I heard Ethan start talking about property values again. But it was Mom's silence that worried me most. The same silence she'd had when she let them take Dad's clothes to Goodwill, when she packed away his photos. When she parked that black SUV in his spot. I pulled out my phone and started recording as I walked away. Something told me I might need evidence of this conversation later. I never meant to find the email. I was just looking for the password to my college fund account, the one Dad set up before he died. Mom was supposed to give me access when I turned 17, but she kept forgetting to share the login details. That's when I saw it in her inbox, Re, Thompson College Fund Transfer Request. My hands shook as I clicked. The message was from our family accountant, dated 3 days ago. Lydia, I must advise against withdrawing from Avery's college fund. James was very specific about these funds being used solely for Avery's education. Additionally, using this money for Chloe's dance academy and competition fees could have legal implications. The room spun. Dance academy? Competition fees? What are you doing? I jumped. Chloe stood in the doorway, wearing one of her designer outfits that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Nothing, I said, closing the laptop too quickly. She crossed her arms. Were you going through Lydia's emails? I should tell my dad. Go ahead, I shot back. Tell him how you're getting my college money for your dance classes. Her face went pale. What? Don't pretend you didn't know. She looked away. Dad said Lydia offered. He said she wanted to support my dancing because she never had opportunities like that growing up. That wasn't her money to offer. Heavy footsteps on the stairs made us both turn. Mom appeared, still in her hospital scrubs. Girls? Everything okay, up here? Tell her, I said to Chloe. When she stayed silent, I turned to Mom. Want to explain why you're stealing my college fund? Mom's face did that thing it always did when she was caught, a flash of guilt, quickly replaced by defensive anger. I'm not stealing anything. I'm making decisions for this family. My college fund isn't family money. Dad left it for my education. Your father. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Your father isn't here anymore, Avery. Things change. Families change. Chloe has real talent. And I don't? My voice cracked. I'm getting straight A's. I'm applying to Dad's alma mater. I'm doing everything he wanted. Everything he wanted? Mom's voice rose. What about what I want? What about moving forward instead of living in the past? Moving forward doesn't mean erasing him. Nobody's erasing anything, Ethan said, appearing behind Mom. Of course he was here. He was always here now. We're just trying to build something new. Together. By stealing my future? Don't be dramatic, Mom snapped. We're not stealing anything. We're redistributing resources to benefit everyone. Benefit everyone? I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. You mean benefit Chloe? Perfect Chloe, who needs expensive dance classes and competitions, and I never asked for this. Chloe burst out. I didn't ask to move here or share a room or take anyone's money. She ran past us, down the stairs. The front door slammed. Now look what you've done, Mom said. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I'll go check on her, he said, already heading downstairs. Mom turned back to me, her face hard. This discussion is over. The decision's been made. Just like the decision to get engaged? To move them in? To sell Grandpa's house? That's enough. She stepped closer, finger pointed. I am still your mother. No, I said quietly. My mother died with Dad. I don't know who you are anymore. I pushed past her, grabbing my jacket and keys. Behind me, I heard her calling my name, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My feet carried me automatically to Grandpa Walter's house, vision blurry with tears. He opened the door before I could knock, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. She's using my college fund, I sobbed into his shoulder. Dad's money. She's giving it to Chloe. His arms tightened around me. Then it's time, he said quietly, to show them your father's other letter. I pulled back, wiping my eyes. What other letter? Grandpa's expression was grim. The one he wrote when he knew he was dying. The one about protecting you, and your future, no matter what. Dad's letter trembled in my hands as I sat in Grandpa Walter's study. The paper was worn at the creases, like Grandpa had read it many times before showing it to me. Your mother doesn't know about this, Grandpa said, settling into his chair. James asked me to keep it safe until you needed it. The letter detailed everything, a separate trust fund Dad had set up before he died, one that Mom couldn't touch. One that would ensure I could go to college without depending on anyone else. He'd known, somehow. Known that Mom might try to reshape our lives after he was gone. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, looking up from the paper. Because your father asked me to wait. He wanted you to try to maintain a relationship with your mother if possible. Grandpa adjusted his glasses. But now. My phone buzzed, another missed call from Mom. I'd been ignoring them all morning. I can't go back there, I said quietly. Not after what she tried to do with the college fund. You don't have to. Grandpa leaned forward. Your old room here is still yours. Always has been. A knock at the front door made us both jump. Through the window, I saw Mom's car in the driveway. I'll handle this, Grandpa said, standing up. I heard their voices in the hallway, Mom's urgent whispers, Grandpa's firm responses. Then Ethan's voice joined them. Of course he was here too. She's 17, Dad, Mom was saying. She can't just decide to. Actually, she can. I stepped into the hallway, Dad's letter clutched in my hand. And I am. Mom's eyes fixed on the paper. What's that? Insurance, I said. Against exactly what you tried to do. Ethan stepped forward, all smooth concern. Avery, you're upset. We understand. But running away isn't the answer. I'm not running away. I'm choosing to live with my grandfather. Don't be ridiculous, Mom snapped. You're coming home right now. That's not home anymore. It's just a house where I don't have a room, don't have a voice, and apparently don't have a future unless it fits your new family's plans. What letter is that? Mom demanded, reaching for it. I stepped back. Dad's letter. The one he wrote explaining the trust fund he set up for me. The one you can't touch. The color drained from her face. What? He knew, Mom. He knew you tried to change everything after he was gone. So he made sure I'd be protected. Ethan's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for me to catch the calculation behind his concerned facade. Lydia, he said softly, maybe we should discuss this at home. There's nothing to discuss, I cut in. I'm staying here with Grandpa. My college fund, the one you tried to take, stays untouched. And the trust fund stays where it is. You can't just, Mom started. Actually, she can, Grandpa interrupted. The paperwork's already filed. I'm her legal guardian now. Mom staggered back like she'd been slapped. You went behind my back? Like you went behind mine with my college fund? Silence fell. Through the window, I saw Chloe sitting in the car, watching us. Our eyes met briefly before she looked away. This isn't over, Mom said finally, her voice shaking. You're my daughter. Then start acting like it. I opened the front door. Start putting me first sometimes, instead of your new life with Ethan. They left, Mom crying, Ethan guiding her to the car with his hand on her back. As they pulled away, I saw him checking his phone, probably already calculating how this would affect his plans. Grandpa's hand settled on my shoulder. You okay? I nodded, though my hands were still shaking. Dad knew this might happen. He tried to protect me even after. I couldn't finish. He did protect you, Grandpa said quietly. And so will I. I looked around the familiar study, at the photos of Dad and me on the walls, at the college brochures Grandpa had already collected for me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I should start moving my things, I said. Already cleared out the garage for you. Grandpa smiled. Welcome home, kiddo. 3 months living with Grandpa Walter had given me a new normal. My grades were up, college applications were submitted, and I'd finally started sleeping through the night again. But life has a way of pulling the rug out just when you think you're steady on your feet. I noticed it first during our morning coffee routine. Grandpa's hands trembled as he reached for his mug, spilling drops across the counter. Just tired, he said, wiping up the mess. But I caught him squinting at his morning paper, the words seeming to swim before his eyes. The next day, he forgot to pick me up from school. I found him in his study, staring blankly at his desk calendar. Grandpa? He looked up, confused. Avery? What time is it? 4:30. Oh God, I was supposed to. He pressed his fingers to his temples. I've been getting these headaches. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Mom stood on the porch, still in her hospital scrubs. Everything okay? She asked, peering past me. The school called when no one picked Avery up. We're fine, I said quickly. Grandpa just lost track of time. She frowned. Dad? Are you feeling all right? Just a headache, he mumbled, but his voice was slurred at the edges. Mom switched to doctor mode instantly, checking his pupils, asking questions. I stood frozen, watching her examine him with professional detachment. You need to see a neurologist, she said finally. Today. I have an appointment next week. No, Dad. Today. The hospital waiting room felt like a time warp. Mom made calls while I sat with Grandpa, watching him drift in and out of focus. Did you tell Ethan where you are? I asked Mom when she returned with coffee. He's handling it. Her voice was clipped. He wanted to come, but... But what? She hesitated. He thought it might be better if we discussed living arrangements first. My stomach clenched. Living arrangements? Avery, if your grandfather needs care. He has care. He has me. You're 17. You can't. Watch me. Grandpa stirred. Stop fighting, he mumbled. Please. The doctor's words blurred together, mass tests, treatment options. I caught fragments through the roaring in my ears, advanced stage, and aggressive growth, and a quality of life decisions. Mom gripped Grandpa's hand while he nodded calmly, like they were discussing the weather instead of his brain tumor. Later that night, I found a text from Chloe. Dad's already talking about selling the house. Says it's for the best. I'm sorry. I deleted it without responding. We should discuss options, Mom said over dinner, hospital cafeteria sandwiches that tasted like cardboard. I'm not leaving him, I said. Of course not. But maybe it's time to come home. All of us. We could convert the den into a sick room, so Ethan can watch Grandpa die while he plans to sell his house? That's not fair. None of this is fair. My voice cracked. A nurse glanced our way, and I lowered it. First Dad, now Grandpa. And you just want to pack everything away like it never existed. I'm trying to help. No, you're trying to control everything. Like always. Grandpa's voice drifted from his hospital bed. Avery, come here. I went to him, taking his weathered hand in mine. Your mother's right about one thing, he said softly. You can't do this alone. I'm not leaving you. No one's leaving anyone. He squeezed my hand. But we need help. Professional help. We can get nurses, I said quickly. Home care. I'll figure it out. With what money? The question hung there, heavy with implications. Dad's trust fund was for college. Grandpa's savings wouldn't cover long-term medical care. I'll defer college, I said. Work instead. No. His voice was stronger now. You're going to college. That's not negotiable. But sometimes, he said, protecting someone means knowing when to let go. I looked at Mom, hovering in the doorway, then back at Grandpa. The choice loomed before me, hold on to my anger, or find a way forward together. I need time, I whispered. Time, Grandpa said with a sad smile, is something none of us have enough of. Grandpa Walter died on a Tuesday, just like Dad. Maybe Tuesdays just had it out for my family. The funeral home smelled like artificial flowers and coffee. I sat in the front row, staring at the closed casket, while people filed past with their practiced sympathy. Mom hovered nearby, trying to play both grieving daughter and concerned mother, failing at both. He left this for you, the lawyer said quietly, handing me an envelope during the reception. Asked me to deliver it today. I slipped it into my pocket without opening it. I couldn't handle any more last words right now. Avery. Ethan's voice. He'd been working the room like a politician, shaking hands, accepting condolences. We should discuss the house. Not today. The market's hot right now. If we list quickly. I said not today. Honey, Mom cut in, we need to be practical. The medical bills are covered, I said. Grandpa told me. What do you mean, covered? I met her eyes. He had insurance. And savings. And plans. Plans? Ethan's voice sharpened. What plans? Ask your lawyer. I stood up. I need air. Outside, I found Chloe sitting on the steps, picking at her black dress. I'm sorry, she said. About everything. Thanks. Dad's being weird about the house. When isn't he weird about money? She almost smiled. True. Back inside, I heard raised voices from the funeral home office. Mom and Ethan, arguing with the lawyer. What do you mean he left everything to Avery? The house, the savings, everything except a small provision for Lydia. It's all legally binding. She's 17. With a court-appointed trustee until she's 18. Which is in 3 months. I stepped into the doorway. Mom's face was flushed, Ethan's carefully constructed mask cracking. You knew about this? Mom demanded. Grandpa told me last week. In the hospital, between morphine doses. He wanted to make sure I'd be okay. You're not okay. Mom exploded. You're 17. You need your mother. Like you needed yours? Before you let Ethan talk you into selling her jewelry? She flinched. That's different. No, it's not. You keep trying to erase the past, but some of us want to remember it. Remember it? Ethan scoffed. You're living in it. Clinging to a dead man's house won't bring him back. Or your father. The room went silent. Get out. My voice was ice. Both of you. Avery. Get out. They left, Mom crying, Ethan steering her with that possessive hand on her back. Always steering, always controlling. Alone in the office, I finally opened Grandpa's letter. Dear Avery. By now you know about the house and the money. What you don't know is why. Your father and I planned this together before he died. We saw what was happening to your mother, how grief was changing her, making her vulnerable to people who might take advantage. The house isn't just a building, kiddo. It's your anchor. Your safe harbor. Don't let anyone take that from you. But remember, harbors aren't meant to keep ships forever. They're just safe places to rest before the next journey. Your mother isn't a bad person. She's lost, like you were. Maybe, with time, you can help each other find your way back. All my love. Grandpa. I folded the letter, my vision blurring. Through the window, I watched Mom and Ethan in the parking lot. He was gesturing angrily, she was shaking her head. Then she did something I hadn't seen before, she stepped away from his controlling hand, walking to her car alone. My phone buzzed. A text from Chloe, Dad's talking about contesting the will. Says he has proof Grandpa wasn't competent when he signed it. Of course he was. Even now, Ethan was plotting, scheming, trying to take what wasn't his. I touched the letter in my pocket. Safe harbor, Grandpa had said. But sometimes, to keep a harbor safe, you have to weather one last storm. Looking at the lawyer's business card, I made a decision. It was time to show Ethan exactly what kind of storm he'd sailed into. The locksmith finished his work just as Ethan's BMW pulled into the driveway. Perfect timing. This is private property, I called from the porch. You're not welcome here. Ethan stepped out, straightening his tie. Always dressed for business, even when trying to steal someone's home. Actually, I have documentation suggesting otherwise. He pulled out a folder. Even from here, I could see my grandfather's signature, shaky, barely legible, dated during his final hospital stay. Amazing what people will sign when they're on morphine, I said. Your grandfather was perfectly lucid. Ethan smiled that toothpaste commercial smile. The witnesses will testify to that. What witnesses? The nurses you bribed? His smile flickered. You should be careful making accusations like that. Like the accusations you made about Grandpa's mental state? The ones you threatened to take to court? Movement caught my eye. Mom's car pulling up, Chloe in the passenger seat. They weren't supposed to be here. I brought reinforcements, Ethan said smugly. Your mother agrees the house should be sold. For everyone's benefit. Mom stepped out, looking uncertain. Avery, please. We need to talk about this rationally. Rationally? I pulled out my phone. Like how Ethan rationally discussed selling Grandpa's house while he was still alive. I pressed play on the recording from that day in Grandpa's study. Ethan's voice filled the air, the old man's dying anyway. Once he's gone, we'll contest whatever will he's got. No judge will side with a teenager over her mother. Mom's face went white. Chloe stepped away from her father, moving closer to the porch where I stood. You recorded me? Ethan's mask cracked. That's illegal. In this state? Only if both parties don't know they're being recorded. Grandpa knew. He wanted evidence of who you really are. Dad? Chloe's voice was small. What's he talking about? About contesting the will before. Stay out of this, princess. Don't call me that. She climbed the porch steps, standing beside me. Not after what you did to Mom's inheritance when she died. Ethan's face darkened. Chloe. Tell them, she said. Tell them what you did to Mom's money. The money that was supposed to be for my college. Mom turned to Ethan. What is she talking about? Nothing. She's confused. I saw the papers, Chloe continued. The ones you hide in your desk. Mom left me a trust fund, just like Avery's dad did for her. But you spent it all on your investments. The silence that followed was deafening. Is this true? Mom asked. Lydia, don't let them manipulate you. Answer the question. His mask finally shattered. Everything I did for us. For our future. No, Mom said quietly. You did it for yourself. Just like you're doing now. She walked up to the porch, past Ethan's reaching hand. For the first time in months, she really looked at me. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've been so blind. We're not done here, Ethan called. I'll take this to court. With what evidence? I held up my phone. The recording of you plotting to steal from a dying man? Or maybe Chloe's trust fund papers? You wouldn't dare. Try me. He looked between us and me, Mom, Chloe, seeing his carefully constructed plan crumbling. Without a word, he got back in his BMW and drove away. Mom touched my arm hesitantly. Can we talk? Really talk? I looked at the new locks on Grandpa's door, my door now. Safe harbor, he'd called it. But harbors weren't meant to keep ships forever. Coffee? I offered. I think there's some of Grandpa's blend left. Mom smiled through her tears. I'd like that. Chloe hung back. I should go. Stay, I said. We have plenty of rooms here. If you want one. As we went inside, I felt the weight of Dad's letter in my pocket, Grandpa's words echoing. Sometimes protecting someone means knowing when to let go. But maybe it also means knowing when to let them back in. 1 year later, I stood in Grandpa's study, my study now, holding my college acceptance letter. Dad's alma mater. Full scholarship. Everything they'd wanted for me. The house had changed over the past year, but not in the ways Ethan had planned. Instead of being sold off, it had become something new, a safe harbor for more than just me. Chloe lived in what used to be Grandpa's guest room, her dance trophies mixing with his old books. After the custody battle, she'd chosen to stay here with us. Turned out she had her own trust fund lawyer, one who helped her recover what Ethan had taken. Is that it? Mom asked from the doorway. She came over 3 times a week now, slowly rebuilding what we'd lost. The letter from Stanford? I nodded, running my fingers over the embossed letterhead. Your father would be so proud, she said softly. Both of them would. The doorbell rang. Probably the realtor, not for this house, but for Mom's. She was finally selling it, moving into the small cottage down the street. Close enough to visit, far enough to give us space. I'll get it, Chloe called from downstairs. I placed the acceptance letter on the desk, next to the last photo taken of Dad, Grandpa, and me together. They were both smiling, real smiles, not the kind Ethan had perfected. Have you heard from him? I asked Mom. She shook her head. Not since the divorce. Last I heard, he was in Seattle, trying to convince some tech startup to hire him. Good riddance, Chloe said, returning with a package. This came for you, Avery. The return address made my heart skip, Dad's old law firm. Inside was a letter, dated just weeks before he died. Dear Avery. If you're reading this, it means you're about to start college. Your grandfather promised to hold this letter until then. By now you've probably faced challenges I couldn't protect you from. You've probably had to make hard choices about forgiveness, justice, and what family really means. Remember what I told you about harbors? They're not just safe places to rest, they're where journeys begin. Your journey is just starting, kiddo. The house is yours now, to do with as you choose. But I hope you'll consider what you've built there, not just a shelter from storms, but a place where broken things can heal. I'm proud of you, not just for what you've achieved, but for who you've become. Love. Dad. I looked around the study, seeing it through new eyes. The desk where Chloe did her homework. The chair where Mom sat during our weekly dinners. The walls that had witnessed both endings and beginnings. You okay? Mom asked.
Yeah.
I said, surprised to find it was true. Just thinking about harbors. What about them? How they're not just about protecting things. They're about launching them too. Chloe picked up my acceptance letter. Stanford's pretty far away. It is, I agreed. But distance doesn't matter much when you know where home is. Mom touched the photo on the desk. Your father used to say that love isn't about holding on, it's about giving people room to sail and a safe place to return. Speaking of sailing, Chloe said, my dance recital's next week. If you guys want to come. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Later that night, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of hope. Mom's car was parked in the driveway, not in Dad's old spot, but in her own new space. Chloe's music drifted down from upstairs, no longer an intrusion but part of the house's rhythm. I thought about revenge, about protection, about all the ways we try to hold on to what we love. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you, it's about building something stronger from the wreckage. Dad and Grandpa had given me a harbor. But what I'd built here was something even better, a home where broken ships could become whole again. I pulled out my phone and started typing, Dear Stanford Admissions. My journey was just beginning, but for the first time since that Tuesday afternoon that changed everything, I knew exactly where I was headed.
I never thought my own wedding dress fitting would be the moment my family finally broke me. But there I was, standing on a pedestal surrounded by mirrors, watching my mother's name flash across my phone screen like a warning sign. My name is Marlo. Marley to anyone who actually likes me, and I should have known better than to answer that call. Darling, we need to discuss your engagement party, my mother said, her voice carrying that sugary sweetness that always preceded bad news. There's been a slight development. I caught my reflection wincing as the seamstress pinned another section of ivory lace. Mom, everything's already arranged. The venue's booked, deposits are paid. Yes, well, your sister just got the most wonderful news. She's being considered for junior partner at her firm, and we simply must celebrate properly. The seamstress accidentally pricked my hip with a pin, but I barely felt it. What exactly are you saying? The 23rd would be perfect for Delilah's celebration. I've already started calling people. That's my engagement party date, I said, my voice hollow. You know that's my engagement party date. Darling, be reasonable. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for your sister. You can reschedule your little party for another weekend. The seamstress had stopped working, pretending to adjust something at the hem while obviously listening. I didn't blame her. This was probably better than her usual entertainment. Mom, Jonah's family is flying in from Seattle. We've had this plan for months. Well, they can change their flights, can't they? Delilah really needs this, sweetheart. You know how sensitive she is about her achievements. I closed my eyes, remembering all the times I'd stepped aside for Delilah's needs. My 16th birthday party, downgraded to a family dinner because Delilah had a dance recital. My college graduation celebration, shortened because Delilah was having relationship troubles and needed the family's attention. No, I said quietly. I beg your pardon? I said no. I'm not rescheduling. The silence on the other end was deafening. When my mother spoke again, her voice had lost all its sweetness. Marlo Grant, you are being incredibly selfish. Your sister has had every other moment of my life. She can't have this one. I cannot believe you're being so difficult about this. After everything we've done for you. Everything you've done for me? I laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged even to my own ears. Name one thing, Mom. One thing you've done for me that didn't somehow end up being about Delilah. I will not stand here and be attacked by my own daughter. When you've calmed down and are ready to be reasonable, you can call me back. The line went dead. I stood there, still in my half-pinned wedding dress, feeling like I was 13 again, small, insignificant, and always wrong. Do you need a minute, honey? The seamstress asked gently. Before I could answer, the fitting room door opened and Jonah walked in, his eyes immediately finding mine in the mirror. One look at my face, and he knew something was wrong. Marley, what happened? I opened my mouth to tell him it was nothing, that I was fine, but what came out instead was a sob. He was across the room in 3 strides, careful not to step on the dress as he took my hand. Your mom? He asked quietly. I nodded, tears falling freely now. She wants me to cancel our engagement party. For Delilah. Again. His jaw tightened, but his thumb kept drawing gentle circles on my palm. What do you want to do? And that was the difference, wasn't it? In all the years of giving way to Delilah's needs, no one had ever asked what I wanted. But Jonah always did. I squeezed his hand, looking at our reflection in the mirror. Me in my wedding dress, him in his worn jeans and favorite blue sweater. Both of us a little battle-worn, but standing together. I want to have our engagement party, I said firmly. And I want to stop letting them make me feel guilty for existing. He smiled, but his eyes were serious. Then that's what we'll do. Together. I nodded, already knowing this wasn't over. My phone buzzed again, probably my mother rallying reinforcements. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to answer. The Sunday family dinner tradition felt like walking into a minefield. 3 days had passed since my mother's phone call, and now I sat at my parents' dining table, watching Delilah beam as she detailed her potential promotion to an attentive audience. Of course, nothing's official yet, she said, batting her eyes modestly. But Richard, that's the senior partner. He practically guaranteed it. That's wonderful, sweetheart, my mother cooed, reaching across to squeeze Delilah's hand. We'll make sure your celebration is absolutely perfect. I stabbed at my roast beef, pretending not to notice my father's uncomfortable glance in my direction. Jonah's hand found my knee under the table, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. Actually, Delilah continued, I was thinking we could do it at the Grove. You know, that new venue downtown. My fork clattered against the plate. The Grove was our venue, the one Jonah and I had spent months researching and finally booked for our engagement party. That's already booked, I said quietly. My mother's smile tightened. Well, I'm sure they can accommodate both events. It's such a lovely space. Both events. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the engagement party you're trying to cancel? Marlo, my father warned, using his rarely deployed stern voice. Let's not do this now. Do what, Dad? Point out how ridiculous this is? Delilah doesn't even have the promotion yet. You're just jealous, Delilah snapped, her practiced poise cracking. You can't stand that something good is happening to me. Something good is always happening to you. The world revolves around your needs, your wants, your everything. Girls, my mother interjected sharply. This behavior is completely inappropriate. You know what's inappropriate? I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The fact that you're trying to hijack my engagement party for a maybe promotion that Delilah might get. The fact that you've spent my entire life making me feel like I matter less than her. That's not true, my father protested weakly. Really? Remember my college graduation? The one you cut short because Delilah was having boy troubles? Or my sweet 16 that turned into her dance recital dinner? Those were different circumstances, my mother said dismissively. You're being dramatic. I'm being dramatic? You're the one who. Enough. My father's fist hit the table, making the water glasses jump. Marlo, if you can't be supportive of your sister's success, perhaps you should leave. The silence that followed was deafening. Jonah stood up beside me, his chair making the same harsh sound against the floor. Thank you for dinner, he said, his voice cold and formal. We'll be going now. As we walked to the door, I heard my mother's voice behind us. This is exactly why we're concerned about your engagement, dear. This sort of selfish behavior doesn't bode well for marriage. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. What did you just say? Your mother's right, Delilah chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern. If you can't even be happy for your own sister, how can you possibly be ready for marriage? I turned slowly, meeting my mother's gaze. The engagement party is happening on the 23rd, at the Grove, with or without you. If you do this, my mother said, her voice low and threatening, there will be consequences. There already have been, I replied. 28 years of them. Outside, the cool evening air hit my face like a wake-up call. Jonah wrapped an arm around my shoulders as we walked to the car. You okay? He asked. No, I admitted. But I will be. My phone buzzed, a text from Delilah. You've always been so dramatic. Don't worry though, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why you're really canceling your engagement party. I showed the message to Jonah, who read it with a clenched jaw. She's bluffing, he said, but we both knew better. My sister had always been skilled at spinning narratives that made her the hero and me the villain. Let her try, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I'm done playing by their rules. As we drove away from my childhood home, I realized something had shifted. The hurt was still there, but underneath it was something new, something that felt a lot like freedom. The call from Aunt Vivian came while I was reviewing contracts at work. Her voice trembled with that particular brand of family concern that always made my stomach drop. Marley, sweetheart, I just wanted to check on you. Your mother told me about the situation with Jonah. I sat up straighter in my office chair. What situation? Oh, there was an awkward pause. Maybe I shouldn't have called. It's just, well, we're all worried about you. Breaking off an engagement is never easy. The pen I'd been holding snapped in my hand, blue ink spreading across my fingers like a bruise. I'm sorry, what? Lillian said you and Jonah had a terrible fight. Something about him being controlling about the wedding plans? And with everything happening with Delilah's promotion. I closed my eyes, counting backward from 10 like my therapist had taught me. It didn't help. Aunt Viv, who exactly has Mom told this to? Well, she hesitated. It came up at Bridge Club yesterday. And I believe she mentioned it at Uncle Robert's birthday dinner last weekend. And of course, she had to explain why she was canceling the engagement party reservations. She what? The words came out as a whisper, but they felt like they were being ripped from my throat. Oh dear, I've upset you. I just thought, well, your mother seemed so certain. My phone buzzed with another incoming call, Nolan's face flashing on the screen. Aunt Viv, I have to go. But nothing Mom told you is true. Nothing. I switched calls, my hands shaking. Nolan now isn't. Check your email, he cut in. Right now. I pulled up my inbox, finding his message at the top. It contained a forwarded invitation to Delilah's promotion celebration at the Grove. On the 23rd. My date. Keep reading, Nolan said grimly. The invitation mentioned a special announcement from the guest of honor. At the bottom was a personal note from my mother. We're so pleased to be able to use this beautiful venue now that it's available. Sometimes disappointments lead to better opportunities. I'm going to be sick, I muttered. Want me to kill them? I know people. Well, I know people who've watched crime documentaries. A notification popped up on my screen, another email, this time from my cousin Sarah. So sorry to hear about you and Jonah. Mom said Aunt Lillian is devastated. Then another. Thinking of you during this difficult time. And another. If you need someone to talk to about the breakup. My phone buzzed again, a text from Delilah. Sorry, everyone's finding out about your relationship problems, sis. But maybe this is for the best. You've always rushed into things without thinking them through. I stood up so quickly my chair rolled back and hit the wall. Nolan, I have to go. Where are you going? To fix this. I grabbed my purse and headed for the elevator, ignoring the concerned looks from my coworkers. In the parking garage, I called Jonah. Hey, beautiful. How's your? My mother is telling everyone we broke up. A pause. What? She's telling the whole family you're controlling, and we had a huge fight, and that's why she's canceling our engagement party. Which, by the way, she's already done, so she can throw Delilah a promotion party instead." The sound of his slow, controlled breathing told me he was as angry as I was. "What do you need me to do?" "Meet me at the Grove in 20 minutes. Bring our contract and deposit receipts." "On my way." As I drove, my phone kept buzzing with messages of sympathy and concern. Each one felt like another nail in the coffin of my relationship with my family. But underneath the hurt was something else, something harder and colder that had been building since that day in the bridal shop. My whole life, I'd tried to keep the peace. I'd smiled and stepped aside and swallowed my feelings because that's what good daughters do. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about Jonah, about our future, about the family we wanted to build together. My mother had finally gone too far, and she was about to learn that her dramatic daughter had inherited more than just her stubbornness. I'd learned from the best how to wage war with a smile. The Grove's elegant facade came into view, and I pulled into the parking lot just as Jonah's truck arrived. He got out, holding a folder of documents, his face set in determination. "Ready?" he asked as I walked up. I took his hand, squeezing it tight. Time to write our own story. I hadn't planned on going to Aunt Vivian's weekly bridge club, but after 3 days of damage control, I needed answers. The familiar scent of her lemon squares and coffee hit me as I slipped in through the side door of her Victorian home, voices drifting from the sunroom. "Such a shame about Marlo," someone was saying. "Lillian says the boy has quite a temper." "Well, you know how she's always been." Another voice chimed in, Mrs. Peterson, my mother's oldest friend. So desperate for attention. "Remember that scene she made at Delilah's graduation?" I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding. The scene they were referring to was me having an asthma attack during the outdoor ceremony. "Lillian's beside herself," Aunt Vivian added, her voice carrying that familiar note of concern. "Says Marlo's been acting erratically ever since Delilah's promotion news. Threatening to go ahead with the engagement party even though the relationship is clearly over." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Aunt Vivian had always been my safe harbor in family storms. Now she was not just believing my mother's lies, but spreading them. "Did you hear what she did at the Grove?" Mrs. Peterson asked, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Showed up with that poor boy, making a scene about contracts and deposits. Delilah was there planning her celebration and had to witness the whole thing." My hands clenched into fists. I'd gone to the Grove to protect our venue booking, which we'd managed to do, thanks to our ironclad contract. Delilah hadn't been there at all. "Speaking of Delilah," someone else added, "I hear she's bringing someone special to her promotion party. That handsome senior partner she's been seeing." I stepped into the doorway, unable to stay hidden any longer. The room fell silent, 5 pairs of eyes turning to me in shock. "Marley," Aunt Vivian stammered, rising from her chair. "We weren't expecting." "Clearly not," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You were too busy discussing my failed relationship and unstable behavior." Mrs. Peterson had the grace to look embarrassed, but quickly recovered. "Dear, we're just concerned." "No," I cut her off. "You're just enjoying the show. Let me add to it." I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the photo gallery. Here's Jonah and me yesterday, having dinner with his parents who flew in early for our engagement party. Here's the contract for the Grove, which we still hold. And here's the truth. My mother is lying to all of you because she can't stand that for once something isn't about Delilah. "Marlo," Aunt Vivian started, reaching for me. "Your mother would never. She already has. And you helped her." I turned to face my aunt directly. "You were supposed to be different. You were supposed to be on my side." "I am on your side. We all want what's best for you." "What's best for me?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Do you even know what that means anymore? Or do you just automatically assume whatever my mother says must be right?" The room was so quiet you could hear the ticking of Aunt Vivian's antique clock. I looked at these women who'd known me my entire life, who'd watched me grow up in Delilah's shadow, who'd never once questioned the family narrative. "You know what?
Keep your concern. Keep your gossip.
Keep believing whatever stories make you feel better about watching a mother systematically tear down one daughter to prop up another. I'm done trying to prove my worth to any of you. As I turned to leave, Mrs. Peterson called out, "Marlo, wait. Perhaps we've been hasty. Save it for Bridge Club next week," I said without turning around. "I'm sure you'll all have plenty to discuss." In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed, a text from Delilah. "Heard you made quite a scene at Aunt Viv's. Again. Don't worry, I'll make sure everyone knows you're just stressed about the wedding. You know, the one that's actually happening." The message confirmed what I'd suspected. Delilah had orchestrated this whole thing, feeding information to our mother, who then spread it through her social network like poison. I started the car, a strange calm settling over me. They wanted drama?
Fine.
But this time, I'd write the script. The day before our engagement party, I sat in Jonah's parents' rental house, surrounded by people who actually wanted to celebrate us. The contrast to my own family's absence felt both liberating and crushing. "I still can't believe they're not coming," Sarah, Jonah's sister, said as she helped arrange centerpieces. "What kind of mother misses her daughter's engagement party?" "The kind who's throwing a fake promotion party for her other daughter at the same time," Nolan answered, earning himself a sharp look from Jonah. My phone buzzed, another message from Delilah. "Hope you're ready for tomorrow. Mom's invited practically everyone we know to my party. Guess they all made their choice about which event matters more." "You okay?" Jonah asked quietly, noticing my expression. Before I could answer, his mother Patricia walked in with a stack of photo albums. "Look what I brought. I thought we could display some pictures of you two at the party." As we flipped through the albums, I noticed something that made my throat tight. In every family photo, every holiday snapshot, every casual moment, Jonah's family was actually looking at each other, laughing together, present. "Oh, this one's perfect," Patricia said, pointing to a picture from last Christmas. "Everyone's smiling at the camera. Except us," Jonah finished grinning. In the photo, we were looking at each other, completely oblivious to the camera. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. "Your mother's very hurt that you're going through with this. It's not too late to reconsider." I must have made some sort of sound because suddenly everyone was looking at me. "That's it," Nolan declared, reaching for my phone. "No more family drama until after tomorrow." "Wait," I said, pulling up my messages. "I need to respond to something first." I opened the family group chat and typed, "Since there seems to be some confusion about tomorrow's events, I wanted to clarify something. Our engagement party starts at 6 p.m. at the Grove. Anyone who chooses to attend Delilah's party instead is making a clear statement about where they stand. I won't be sending any more invitations after this." "Marley," Sarah started, but I wasn't finished. I pulled up the photo I'd been saving, the one of Jonah and me at Christmas, lost in our own world while surrounded by people who loved us. I added it to the group chat with a simple message. "This is what real family looks like. Your move." The responses were immediate and predictable. My mother, "How dare you make us choose?" Delilah, "Always have to make everything about you, don't you?" My father, "You're being unreasonable." I turned off my phone. "You know," Patricia said carefully, "when I first met you, I wondered why someone so bright and loving seemed so unsure of herself. Now I understand. You've spent your whole life being told you're wrong for taking up space." "Mom," Jonah warned, but she continued, "No, this needs to be said. Marley, honey, I want you to look at these photos.
Really look at them. Do you know what I see?"
I see my son happier than he's ever been. I see someone who fits into this family so naturally that sometimes I forget you haven't always been here." My vision blurred with tears. "Tomorrow," she continued, "people will make their choices. And those choices will tell you everything you need to know about who deserves to be in your life going forward." Nolan cleared his throat. "Speaking of choices, I may have done something slightly devious." We all turned to look at him. I might have created a public Facebook event for Delilah's promotion party. And I might have invited some people from her firm, including her boss. "Nolan," I gasped. "She doesn't actually have the promotion yet." "Exactly. His grin was wicked. Should make for an interesting evening. I should have felt guilty. Should have told him to undo it. Instead, I felt something else, something that felt dangerously close to satisfaction. Tomorrow's going to be messy, isn't it? Sarah asked. Jonah took my hand, squeezing it gently. Tomorrow's going to be exactly what it needs to be. Looking around at these people, my chosen family, I realized he was right. Whatever happened at the party, I already had everything I needed right here. My phone lit up on the table, Delilah's name flashing on the screen. For the first time in my life, I let it ring. The call came at 3 a.m, 2 days after our engagement party. My mother's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Are you happy now?" she demanded. "Is this what you wanted?" I sat up in bed, Jonah stirring beside me. "What are you talking about? Don't play innocent." Delilah's been suspended pending an ethics investigation. Her boss showed up at her party expecting to announce her promotion, a promotion she hadn't actually received yet. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The room felt suddenly cold. Nolan's Facebook event. I hadn't thought. I didn't. She could lose her job, Marlo. Her entire career could be ruined because you couldn't stand someone else having the spotlight for once. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. "Delilah, hope you're proud of yourself. Guess destroying my life was worth it to finally be mommy and daddy's center of attention." Another buzz. A group email from my father to the entire extended family. "Due to recent unfortunate events caused by ongoing family conflicts, we regret to inform you that we will not be attending Marlo's wedding. We cannot in good conscience celebrate while one daughter deliberately sabotages another." "Mom." I tried again, my voice shaking. "I never meant. You never mean to do anything, do you? Things just happen around you, and somehow Delilah always ends up hurt. Well, congratulations. You've finally outdone yourself." The line went dead. I stared at my phone as messages started pouring in from relatives. Each one felt like another nail in a coffin I'd apparently built myself. "What happened?" Jonah asked, fully awake now. Before I could answer, my phone rang again. "Nolan." "Marley, I'm so sorry," he rushed out. "I didn't think it would go this far. I just wanted to cause a little chaos, maybe embarrass her a bit." "They're suspending her," I said numbly. "There's an ethics investigation." "Shit." He paused. "But hey, maybe she deserves." "Don't." I cut him off. "Just don't." I ended the call, walking to the window of our apartment. The city lights blurred through tears I refused to let fall. "We can fix this," Jonah said from behind me. "Can we? Because from where I'm standing, they're right. I let this happen. I wanted her to hurt like I've hurt, and now." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass. I've become exactly what they always said I was, the jealous sister, the troublemaker, the one who ruins everything. My phone kept buzzing. "Aunt Vivian. I'm disappointed in you, Marlo. I thought you were better than this." Delilah again. Attached is the official suspension notice. Hope it was worth it. By the way, I made sure everyone at work knows exactly who's responsible for this little stunt. "This isn't your fault," Jonah insisted. "You didn't create that event." But I knew about it. I could have stopped it. Instead, I sat there and felt glad. The admission tasted like ash in my mouth. What kind of person does that make me? He reached for me, but I stepped away. "I need some air." Outside, the pre-dawn streets were empty. I walked without direction, my phone continuing its steady stream of accusations and condemnations. Each message painted a clearer picture of who I'd become, someone who'd let revenge poison everything it touched. A final text from my mother. "Delilah's in tears. She may lose everything she's worked for. I hope you're satisfied with what your pettiness has accomplished. Don't contact us again." I found myself at the park where Jonah had proposed, sitting on the same bench where I'd once felt like my life was finally coming together. Now, everything was falling apart, and the worst part was knowing I'd helped it happen. My phone lit up one last time. An email from Delilah's firm. They were requesting a meeting with me to discuss my involvement in recent events. I laughed, the sound hollow and broken in the empty park. I'd wanted so badly to stop being the family victim that I'd turned myself into something worse, the the villain of their story. And maybe, I realized as the sun began to rise over a day I didn't want to face, they'd been right about me all along. The law firm's conference room felt like an interrogation chamber. I sat across from Delilah's boss and 2 HR representatives, my hands steady despite the storm inside. MS. Grant, the senior partner began. We understand you have information about the incident at your sister's celebration. Before I could respond, the door burst open. Delilah stormed in, our mother right behind her. You don't get to do this, Delilah snarled. You don't get to sit there and play victim after what you did. MS. Grant. The younger Ms. Grant. The HR director interjected. This meeting was meant to be private. No, I said, surprising myself. Let them stay. I think it's time we all heard the truth. Delilah laughed, that sharp, cruel sound I'd grown up dreading. The truth? You mean how you orchestrated this whole thing to ruin my career because you couldn't stand me getting a promotion? You didn't have the promotion, I said quietly. That's the truth you're running from. I was going to get it, Richard practically promised. I didn't create that Facebook event. I cut in, turning to the senior partner. But I did bring something else. I pulled out my phone, playing the voice message Delilah had left me last week. You think you're so special with your perfect engagement and your perfect fiancé? I told Richard the first already had the promotion. I told everyone, because I knew once I announced it, they'd have to give it to me. They always give me what I want. The room went deadly quiet. You recorded me? Delilah whispered.
No.
You recorded yourself. Every threatening message, every admission, every lie, you documented it all. I just saved them. Marlo, my mother warned, but I wasn't finished. I also have the texts where you admitted to spreading rumors about my engagement being called off. The ones where you threatened to make me pay for not canceling my party. Would you like me to share those too? Delilah's face had gone white. You're lying. Am I? I turned back to the senior partner. I came here today because I wanted you to know something. I didn't expose Delilah's lie about the promotion. She did that herself, by throwing a celebration for something she hadn't earned. By trying so hard to hurt me, she ended up hurting herself. This is ridiculous, my mother interjected. Delilah would never. Check her work emails, I said to the HR director. Check the dates. She started telling clients about her promotion weeks ago, making promises she couldn't keep, taking meetings she wasn't authorized to take. Delilah lunged across the table, but security was faster. As they escorted her out, she screamed, You've always been jealous, always trying to take what's mine. No, I said, standing. I just stopped letting you take what's mine. My mother followed me into the hallway. How dare you do this to your sister? I didn't do anything to her. I just stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own actions. And yours. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done, Mom. Done being the family's scapegoat. Done watching you enable her worst behavior. Done pretending we're a normal family when we're anything but. So, this is your revenge? Destroying your sister's career?
No.
This is me finally telling the truth. Delilah destroyed her own career. You destroyed our family. And I'm finally free of both of you. As I walked away, Delilah's voice echoed down the hallway. You'll regret this. I'll make sure you regret this. But for the first time in my life, her threats felt empty. I stepped into the sunshine, where Jonah was waiting by the car. How did it go? I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. It went exactly how it needed to. My phone buzzed a message from Nolan. Just heard what happened. You okay? I typed back. Better than okay. I'm free. Behind us, I could hear my mother and sister's voices, still shouting, still trying to spin the narrative their way. But their words couldn't touch me anymore. I had finally written my own ending to their story, and it felt like victory. My wedding day arrived with the kind of perfect autumn sunshine that feels like a gift. Standing in front of the mirror in my dress, I noticed something different about my reflection. The woman looking back wasn't searching for approval anymore. Ready? Nolan asked, adjusting his bow tie. As my man of honor, He'd taken his duties seriously, including intercepting 3 separate attempts by my mother to contact me in the past week. Almost. I touched the empty space where my mother's pearls should have been, the ones she'd promised to every bride in our family. Instead, I wore Patricia's sapphire earrings, something borrowed that felt more like something found. The ceremony space at the Grove looked nothing like Delilah's failed party 6 months ago. Jonah's family filled the front rows, along with friends who'd stood by us through everything. The empty seats on my side told their own story, but somehow they didn't hurt anymore. As I walked down the aisle alone, my father's text declining to attend had been brief and final. I caught glimpses of familiar faces. Aunt Vivian, who'd shown up this morning with tears and apologies, sat quietly in the back. A few cousins who'd chosen to hear my side of the story. Even my mother's best friend, Mrs. Peterson, who'd surprised everyone by publicly defending me after the truth about Delilah's lies came out. Jonah waited at the altar, and the look in his eyes made everything else fade away. During the reception, Nolan clinked his glass for the toast. When Marley first told me about Jonah, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "He sees me." Not the version of her that her family wanted, not the shadow of her sister, just her. Today, we're all seeing the real Marley, strong, loving, and finally, wonderfully free. Later, during our first dance, Jonah whispered, "Any regrets?" I thought about the cost of standing up for myself. Delilah had left the firm, her reputation in tatters. My mother hadn't spoken to me since the confrontation. Family gatherings would forever have a before and after, marked by my decision to stop playing my assigned role. "No," I said honestly. "Just clarity." As the night wound down, Sarah handed me an envelope that had been dropped off at the front desk. I recognized Delilah's handwriting immediately. "You don't have to read it," Jonah said quietly. But I did. Because that's the thing about family. Even when you break free, the threads still tug. "Dear Marley," it began. "I'm starting therapy. Real therapy, not the kind Mom always pushed to fix what she saw as problems. I'm learning about narcissistic family dynamics and golden child syndrome. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it yet. But I am asking for you to know that I see it now. All of it. What they did to you. What I did to you. What we all did to ourselves. Maybe someday we can talk about it. If not, I understand. Be happy, sister. You deserve it." I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my wedding album. Not as an invitation back into the chaos, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. "Dance with me?" Nolan appeared, holding out his hand. "Your husband's busy teaching your new niece how to dab, and it's getting embarrassing." As we swayed to the music, I caught sight of my reflection in the venue's windows. The same autumn sunshine that had greeted me this morning was setting now, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. "You know," Nolan said, following my gaze, "revenge stories usually end with someone winning and someone losing. But this feels different. Because it's not about winning anymore, I realized. It's about choosing yourself." Later that night, as Jonah and I left for our honeymoon, my phone lit up with one final message from my father. "Your mother may never understand, but I do. Be happy, Marlo. Be free." I turned off my phone without responding. Some doors needed to stay closed, at least for now. But others were opening, and through them, I could see a future where I wasn't defined by who I'd left behind, but by who I'd chosen to become. And that felt like the happiest ending of all.